The story unfolds in Taipei, China, where a man, Charles, is baking a cake in his luxurious home. Suddenly, three masked intruders sneak in. Charles notices them and swiftly prepares himself for a confrontation, and a fight ensues, with Charles fiercely battling the assailants. However, amidst the chaos, the cake burns as he forgot to turn off the oven. In no time, two loyal bodyguards from Charles's family rush to his aid, indicating his affluent background as the son of a prominent mafia figure. Charles was raised in an environment filled with fights, which toughened him up. Shortly after, Charles's father, Big Son, arrives with his best bodyguards, expressing concern for Charles's safety. Despite Charles's formidable fighting skills, his father worries about him. Suddenly, a bullet strikes Big Son through the window, causing chaos as the bodyguards spring into action. In that moment, Big Son mentions Charles's mother, Eileen's son. The scene shifts to the bustling Son family headquarters, where various transactions involving weapons, money bundles, and drugs are underway. Charles meets with one of his father's trusted confidants, suspecting the attack was orchestrated by their rival, Sleepy Chan. However, he's cautioned against taking matters into his own hands, as per mafia protocol. Instead, he's advised to follow his father's last command, which to visit his mother in Los Angeles, prioritizing family protection. Meanwhile, in Los Angeles, a man is showing uses online transportation. Unfortunately, his passenger is drunk, leading to an unpleasant experience. Later, the man, named Bruce, returns home, visibly tired after a long day. The following morning, Bruce has breakfast with his mother, Eileen's son, indicating he's Charles' younger brother. After breakfast, Bruce heads to school for his final semester exams, and then to the student affairs office to pay his semester fees. However, he realizes he lacks sufficient funds, putting his education in jeopardy. Frustrated and perplexed, Bruce visits his friend Ike's house. This highlights the vast difference between Bruce's modest life and Charles's affluent one. Bruce's life is ordinary, unlike Charles's lavish lifestyle. Bruce seeks to borrow money from TK to pay his semester fees. He confesses that he used the money his mother gave him for an improvisational drama class. TK, however, doesn't have the $2,000 needed for Bruce's fees, but suggests selling drugs to cover the costs, revealing that he works as a drug courier for a Los Angeles mafia group. The scene then shifts back to Charles, who has just landed at Los Angeles airport. Unaware that he's being followed, he stops by a cake shop to buy a cake for his mother. Upon reaching home, he notices someone lurking around. Without hesitation, the mysterious person attacks Charles from behind. Despite this surprise attack, Charles, skilled in martial arts, fights back fiercely, ultimately defeating the assailant. Instead of killing him immediately, Charles decides to interrogate him. However, the attacker proves to be resilient, freeing himself and pulling out a knife. He vaguely mentions the necessity of thoroughness in eradicating evil. Realizing the threat, Charles understands he must eliminate him to prevent further attacks. Shortly after, Eileen arrives at the house, while Charles is sitting relaxed, smoking on a cigarette in the corner of the room. It's been 2 decades since they last saw each other, and their reunion is far from ordinary, as there's a dead body discovered in Eileen's home. Shortly after, they casually chat about who the deceased might be, alongside enjoying some cake brought by Charles. Eileen then suggests Charles change his clothes and relax over dinner. But Charles, in his typical arrogance, insists on hunting down their enemies right away, even though he doesn't know where to start. Despite his stubbornness, Eileen, being experienced, advises him to stay calm, suspecting their adversary has been tracking him since Taipei. Eventually, Charles agrees to hire bodyguards for protection during this Cold War while gathering further information. The scene switches to a nightclub where Bruce is hanging out. He's convinced by TK to get involved in drug dealing. Soon, he finds himself in a VIP room meeting May, the biggest drug lord in Los Angeles, surrounded by her associates. After some introductions, Bruce is sent out to start selling drugs for May. As they start selling, Charles heads to the club, aiming to find someone influential to hire bodyguards for a few days. But unexpectedly, a woman pulls him onto the dance floor. Amidst the chaos, he bumps into Bruce, realizing he's his younger brother. While Bruce offers drugs innocently, but Charles quickly gets him out to avoid their mother's anger. Suddenly, May's guards confront them, and Charles is swiftly subdued. Not long after, Charles wakes up in the VIP room, where May approaches him. While her bodyguards don't know him, but May recognizes him as a legend from China and part of the infamous Jade Dragon Mafia family. Hearing this, Bruce is perplexed, as he has only lived an ordinary life as an online transportation driver. May then questions his motives for being there. Charles admits that he just needs bodyguards for a week, but May doubts him. She orders her guards to beat him and use Bruce as leverage. Initially forced to defend himself, Charles eventually overpowers May's bodyguards. Meanwhile, a group of women on motorcycles makes their way to the nightclub. One of them plants explosives to blast through the club's back wall. As the fight between Charles and May ensues inside, a sudden explosion kills everyone instantly. May, still conscious, puts up a fight, but is fatally shot by mysterious individuals. Meanwhile, Bruce, who regained consciousness, quickly wakes up Charles and urges him to leave from there. Luckily, TK arrives with his car and swiftly gets them out of there. Shortly after, they end up at their house, where Bruce is shocked to find his mother a man. Eileen then sends Bruce to bed and instructs Charles to deal with May's body, and Bruce is left in disbelief. The next morning, Charles dismembers May's corpse and places the parts in a suitcase. Bruce, witnessing this, starts questioning his family's nature and his brother's actions. However, Charles refrains from providing an immediate answer and telling Bruce to keep quiet and not ask too much. Shortly after, TK arrives with food. Not long after, Charles is done mutilating the corpse and tells Bruce to put it in the car's trunk. Bruce is reluctant, feeling disgusted and uneasy. However, TK promptly complies, even showing respect to Charles, expressing his desire to become part of the family. Eileen then joins them, and Bruce asks what's happening, but he gets the same response as before, as they refuse to involve him in their mafia life. Eileen then instructs Charles to send the corpse to an address she provides, but he refuses, assigning the task to Bruce and TK instead, as he needs to gather information on their enemies. Eileen objects, insisting that Bruce goes to college and take his exam, while Charles escorts him and sending the corpse to the specified location. Charles hesitates, claiming that he is in charge of all operations authority without their father, but Eileen reminds him that she's in charge and he must follow her rules, while she will gather the information. Shortly after, the siblings set off in the car. However, during the ride, Charles tells Bruce to come along to deliver the corpse. Bruce protests, saying that his mom told him to go to campus, not with Charles. There's a short argument, but Charles explains Bruce will eventually be drawn into the mafia world. In the end, Bruce reluctantly agrees to follow Charles' instruction. Upon arrival at the location, Bruce is instructed to take the suitcase into a warehouse, where he meets a nervous man. Meanwhile, Charles waits outside to study the recipe of the food he had for breakfast earlier. When Bruce comes out, he's not alone, as he brings out a big lizard to be delivered to an address. Upon seeing this, Charles gets angry, confronting the man in the warehouse for refusing to carry the lizard. Despite Charles's efforts, the man won't budge, citing the principle of Quan-Si, an agreement among mafia members that must not be violated, ensuring mutual benefit for both parties. Charles is left with no choice but to comply and agrees to deliver the large lizard. On the other hand, a female deputy attorney general named Alexis arrives at the crime scene of the nightclub massacre from the previous night. Confidently snacking, she asserts her intention to handle the important case. She learns that a powerful mafia from Taipei has sparked conflict in Los Angeles and believes that such a situation cannot be ignored. Alexis informs the bewildered police inspector about CCTV footage in the alley, capturing everyone leaving the club, much to the inspector's appreciation. Meanwhile, TK at home, playing the game, when the police knock on his door for questioning. At the same time, Eileen meets with her informants, who happen to be women from social gatherings and mahjong circles, to gather information. It's her preferred method, and the information from these women is highly reliable. Meanwhile, Bruce and Charles were on their way to deliver the large lizard. During the trip, Charles educates Bruce about the triad, a group of powerful mafias based in Taipei, Taiwan. He suspects their current enemy is Sleepy Chan, a rival of their father, though he lacks solid proof. Charles emphasizes their family's principle of prioritizing family protection above all else. Upon arriving at a location, they see a large house bustling with preparations for the owner's child's birthday party, who happens to be a major mafia member and part of the triad. As Bruce waits outside, he spots clowns wearing dinosaurs, costumes armed with weapons emerging from a car. His suspicions are confirmed when they attack the bodyguards. Bruce then immediately seeks out Charles inside. Meanwhile, Charles casually having conversation with the mafia member to gather information. Charles even shows May's head to the man, startling him. Before they can identify their enemy, Bruce arrives disguised as a dinosaur, but the thick bulletproof glass thwarts their attempt to break in. Soon after, two more assailants enter, targeting Charles and the mafia member. A fierce battle erupts. Meanwhile, the mafia boss falls victim to the attack, unable to defend himself. Charles fights back, attempting to flee with Bruce. After successfully escaping, Charles, frustrated by the missed opportunity to learn their enemy's identity, lashes out at Bruce. Moments later, Eileen calls Charles and, furious about the situation, ordering Charles to come home immediately. However, they first drop Bruce at his campus, as instructed by Eileen. On the other hand, TK finds himself in an interrogation room where Alexis pays him a visit. She shows him a photo depicting his car picking up Bruce and Charles, but TK remains silent. Meanwhile, Bruce and Charles reach the campus. As Bruce enters the classroom, he's joined by Grace, who seems somewhat interested in him. Meanwhile, Charles, intending to leave the parking lot, spots his favorite snack and decides to buy it. While enjoying churros, a security guard notices blood stains on Charles's jacket and approaches him suspiciously. However, Charles becomes uncooperative and causing a scene. Shortly after, the inspector and Alexis arrive, looking for Bruce and TK. When Alexis sees Charles, she immediately recognizes Charles as her childhood friend from Taipei. The inspector then requests Charles to open his bag. At the same time, inside the classroom, Bruce witnesses the commotion outside and worries about Charles. Suddenly, screams erupt as students spot a large lizard on the field. Charles seizes the opportunity to escape and is picked up by Bruce in a car. They return home, where Eileen scolds them for disobeying her. The siblings bicker, and Bruce is sent to his room to rest. Eileen then scolding Charles, reminding him to follow her orders for safety. On the other hand, Eileen finally discovers the identity of the mutilated body, but suddenly someone kidnaps her from behind. Back at home, Charles finds the head of the man he once killed in the refrigerator, triggering memories of a similar killer from his past in Taipei with a red string attached on the hair. Shortly after, there's a knock on the door, prompting Charles to prepare for a possible attack. To his surprise, it's Alexis, who boldly visited after learning about Charles from her younger brother. Alexis's visit there is simply to meet Charles again after so long, and they seem to like each other. Alexis then reveals that she's handling the major case involving the Taiwan Mafia War. They both know that they are on different sides. Despite this, she expresses a desire to act professionally and gives her phone number to Charles for future meetings. Eileen, overhearing their conversation, is approached by Bruce afterward. He questions if his mother has adapted to this lifestyle, having witnessed so much violence. Because Bruce, who was raised in Los Angeles, knew his mother as an ordinary person. Eileen then explains that Bruce and Charles were raised differently, with Charles as a killing machine and Bruce as an ordinary person by their parents to protect the family, though her exact meaning remains unclear. The next day, Bruce returns to campus and reunites with Grace. This time, their relationship grows closer, revealing similarities between them. However, while Bruce gazes out the window, he spots a woman resembling May. Startled, Bruce hastily gathers his belongings and leaves the classroom, with the woman in pursuit chases after him. On the flip side, Eileen arriving at a boarding house, the residence of the mutilated man. Sneaking inside, she discovers a message on the wall about eradicating crime comprehensively and finds a red string bracelet. Suddenly, a mysterious man with facial scars appears, wearing a similar red string. Instead of fighting, Eileen screams, causing the man to flee. Meanwhile, at home, Charles is busy making churros using his own recipe. He then receives a call from his father's right-hand man, who informs him of his father's critical condition. Charles knows he must quickly identify the enemy and protect his family, especially his mother, who is likely targeted. While cooking, Charles also prepares a boiling water to boil the bone and crushing it to remove any evidence. His phone rings again, this time from Alexis, inviting him to lunch at a Chinese restaurant. Initially hesitant, Charles agrees to the invitation after Alexis insists on just chatting casually. Not long after, Charles and Alexis meet at a Chinese restaurant, initially sharing stories but quickly turning to exchanging information. Alexis offers to help Charles by providing information and capturing the mafia, ensuring he and his family won't go to jail. However, Charles declines, not needing her assistance. Soon after, Charles's phone rings again, this time from his mother. Eileen then expresses her frustration with Charles' attitude, especially in the kitchen, and says she no longer needs his help. Eileen also informs him that Bruce has been missing for hours, and since he hasn't returned from campus, Alexis suggests that their mother needs Charles' help. With that, Alexis urges Charles to leave immediately after explaining the situation. Charles then went to Bruce's campus and took the time to buy churros while waiting. Shortly after, Eileen arrived. Charles explained that there was something more important than this, but for Eileen, her child's safety was the most important thing. He also mentioned his growing conviction that Sleepy Chan was behind the situation and planned to meet him in Leh. Despite Charles' intention to kill Sleepy Chan, Eileen disagreed with the plan, as it might not be him. Charles and Eileen then visited Bruce's professor, who wasn't in class but questioned them instead. They also met Grace, who shared that Bruce had been taken by a tattooed woman and forced into a car. Initially, Grace thought it was part of their improvisation group's orientation. However, Eileen realized Bruce had been kidnapped, and she also learned that he secretly attended improvisation classes. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Bruce and TK were tied up and both of their thumbs attached to a device. It turned out that the woman who kidnapped them was June, the twin sister of May. June immediately asking for Charles' location, however, chose to not answer. After that, June cut off TK's thumbs. On the other hand, Charles and Eileen headed to a mahjong parlor, where Charles played while Eileen gathered information. After learning about a cocaine dealer in Leh, who might lead them to Bruce, Eileen went alone, leaving Charles behind. At the same time, Bruce endured torture and interrogation, pressured to reveal his brother's whereabouts. Threatened with having his genitals tattooed on his face, Bruce eventually gave a fake address where Charles was supposed to be. June left immediately upon receiving the information. Meanwhile, Eileen and Charles arrived at a restaurant to gather information about Bruce. Charles used his aggressive methods behind the building, while Eileen employed her gentle approach inside, convincing the owner to take her to his office. There, Eileen assessed the situation, discovering that drugs were smuggled through sea fish. Unfortunately, she found no information about Bruce there. Charles, however, managed to obtain an address. Eileen then discussed the next plan, which was to find a safe house for the family, as their home was no longer secure. If Bruce could be traced to the campus, their home could be attacked at any time. On the other hand, Bruce and TK remained bound in the same place. TK then admitted to informing the police about Bruce, which angered him. They planned to leave before June returned, but she arrived sooner than expected, asking about Charles' whereabouts. Bruce stalled, explaining that Charles wasn't responsible for May's death, but rather some mysterious people who bombed the place. June was skeptical, but TK's screams signaled Charles' arrival. June prepared for a fight, but Bruce intervened and explained the misunderstanding between them. Also sharing their common enemy was a group of people who had killed May and attacked the Sun family. Hearing that, June agreed to cooperate with them. Not long after, they returned home, where Eileen treated TK's injured thumb. The atmosphere shifted from tense to relaxed during dinner together. However, June warned Eileen to be cautious around TK, who she believed could endanger them. Eileen then recalled Bruce's lie about his theater class, but agreed to it as long as it didn't interfere with his medical studies. After dinner, Bruce and Charles washed the dishes. Bruce then wondered when everything would end. Charles assured him that they were working on it and advised Bruce to stay brave and occasionally show his gangster side to protect the family. Their relationship seemed to be improving, but Bruce still longed for his normal life. Later, Charles met with Eileen in June, where June mentioned meeting someone who wanted her to tattoo the words "Eradicate Evil" comprehensively and wore a red bracelet. They then planned a strategy to defeat Sleepy Chan's henchmen, but Eileen cautioned that Sleepy Chan might not be the mastermind. Hearing this, June suggested to secretly attacking the people with red bracelets while gathering information. Eileen also shared that the boss of the sea fish restaurant they visited had a connection to Sleepy Chan. She had thoroughly studied every detail of the place and its armed employees. Suddenly, Charles commended his mother's thoroughness, referring to her as Rolodex, a code name for her in the mafia world for knowing every mafia name along with the businesses that do. And Eileen is the only one holding the key to information from the triad. The next day, Charles called Alexis and mentioned the sea fish restaurant they visited. He provided this information to help his plan to eliminate potential future issues. Not long after, the LA police raided the restaurant. However, they found that the restaurant owner brutally murdered with a knife plunged into his chest. Alexis then directed a policeman to prepare May's body for further investigation. Surprisingly, the officer turned out to be the same mysterious man who had previously attacked Eileen. On the evening, the Jade Dragon family gathered for dinner, where Charles attempted to discuss business, but Eileen interrupted, instructing Bruce and TK to leave first. Charles disagreed, believing Bruce was ready to join the family business. However, Eileen insisted that Bruce was not ready and follow her order. As the discussion progressed, they planned a meeting with some mafia members at a spa. They would meet Sleepy Chan, who would be attending with his son, Drowsy Lee, and his associates. Charles also explained that this meeting would be historic, as the last one occurred 20 years ago. However, there was a rule against attacking each other during the meeting. Charles warned that Sleepy might break this rule due to a potential threat to Eileen. Charles then assured that he would step in if anything happened to Eileen. TK also expressed his willingness to support Big Son in the spa meeting. The next day, Bruce was headed to campus, where he was instructed by Eileen to stick with James. When Bruce faced a problem with overdue tuition fees, James swiftly resolved it by paying for 6 semesters up front, showing his financial strength. As they strolled, Grace approached them. Bruce then introduced James as his uncle, and they chatted briefly. Bruce also invited Grace to his improv performance later that night, which she happily accepted. On the other hand, Alexis tried to examine the red bracelet and found a QR code on it. She also took a phone from the gang wearing the red bracelets, but it was locked. Alexis insisted on taking the phone to the hospital where May's body was. However, a police officer noticed her passing by. Meanwhile, at a bar, TK brought Charles and others to meet one of the Korean gangsters. Shortly after, Drowsy also arrived, making Charles felt uneasy about Drowsy's presence. Charles and Take's purposes in meeting the Korean gangster was they wanted to use the spa, but the Korean gang demanded collateral. At that moment, Charles offered TK, the only one he trusted. Drowsy agreed to the terms, but insisted that no women could attend, so Eileen couldn't come. Charles later informed Eileen about the meeting's outcome. Not long after, the Sun family celebrating their survival from the previous meeting. Bruce wanted to attend the meeting, but Eileen refused, urging him to focus on his studies and his upcoming improvisation performance. The next day, Bruce's debut show went well, with his family and his crush, Grace, in the audience. His performance was a hit, earning applause from the crowd. Backstage, the leader of the improvisation club invited Bruce to join the next performance. Grace brought him a drink, and they all decided to go to a club afterward. At the club, Charles stayed in the corner when Bruce tried to talk to him. Charles reminded Bruce that family comes first and asked him to join the triad meeting, promising to protect him. Grace then asked Bruce to dance, and while they were enjoying themselves, Charles tried to contact Alexis with a message. After the party, Eileen reminded Charles of their mission because Sleepy was responsible for Big Son's attack. Charles vowed that if Sleepy was indeed the culprit, he wouldn't leave the meeting alive. On the other hand, Alexis, while in May's room trying to trace the owner of the phone she found. After unlocking it, she discovers a meeting at K-Spa. Attempting to call her colleague, she gets no answer. As she's about to leave in her car, a stranger attacks her, but she scares him off with spicy Korean noodles. At K-Spa, Charles is relieved to see Bruce already there. However, Bruce gets kidnapped before they can enter the meeting. Drowsy then insists that only Charles can attend the meeting. Hearing this, Charles instructs James to intervene if needed. In the meeting room, Bruce becomes the liaison to meet Sleepy, and he's handed a cigarette, symbolizing agreement. When Bruce takes the cigarette, Sleepy immediately provides very important information to him. However, Bruce struggles to understand because the information was in Mandarin, but a few words that Bruce understands are immediately relayed to Charles. The information revealing that Lolo as their common enemy. However, Bruce misinterprets it as lol. As Sleepy finishes his message, two masked figures suddenly emerge from the pool and assassinate him. Charles quickly reacts to the attack, realizing the danger. Panic ensues among everyone present, with both the Sun Group and Drowsy's allies trying to control the chaos. With only a few people left, Charles assigns James to protect Eileen and Bruce, while he and Drowsy deal with the remaining threat. However, the attacker detonates a bomb, killing Drowsy. In the end, Charles is injured and unconscious, with the police arriving at the scene. The following days, Eileen watching news reports about the attack at K-Spa. Soon after, James and the others return home. Bruce then reveals that he acted as a mediator in the previous meeting, sharing important information about Sleepy and the Jade Dragon faction's common enemy. Bruce also mentions the puzzling message, lol, but Eileen quickly grasps its significance. She decides she needs to meet someone to confirm her suspicions, instructing Singh to guard Bruce, while James is tasked with finding Charles. On the other hand, Charles waking up in an unfamiliar apartment. With several injuries, he realizes that he's at Alexis' place. Charles then learns that Alexis rescued him during a raid. Alexis then urges Charles to cooperate with her, revealing that she too was targeted by the Red Bracelet gang. As they talk, Alexis begins cooking, and Charles seeks her assistance. The next day, Bruce is discussing with Singh about the recent meeting. When Bruce mentions lol, Singh immediately recognizes it as Lolo, a codename for Eileen. This revelation suggests that Eileen is now a target for elimination by her enemies. Meanwhile, Eileen attempts to meet with an informant named Hong to gather information about the attack on K-Spa. However, Hong turns out to be corrupted and tries to betray Eileen by setting her up. Shortly after, Eileen is captured by the enemies. Later, Alexis arrives at the scene, managing to sneak and carrying Charles's phone. Back at the campus, Bruce is frustrated that he still can't reach his mother. Grace comes by and offers to assist him, but ends up detaining Taylor, who is upset that Bruce missed the improvisation performance. Meanwhile, Charles still at Alexis' apartment, feeling bored. He decides to tidy up the place and cooks some food to pass the time. On the other hand, Eileen finds herself at the Red Bracelet interrogation site. It's revealed that Eileen is considered a fugitive because she possesses secret knowledge about the triad leaders, making her a target for elimination. However, Eileen begins to assert her dominance by manipulating the interrogators mentally. Meanwhile, Charles is engrossed in baking cakes while admiring the trinkets in Alexis' apartment. Alexis soon arrives, carrying Charles's phone, and she eagerly tries Charles's homemade cake, which brings back fond memories of her grandmother's baking. Alexis then shares that the FBI has identified the person killed at K-Spa as Sleepy. Charles is puzzled by this revelation, as Sleepy's movements were usually secretive. He asks Alexis to gather information on any recent killings of Taiwanese or Chinese individuals. Meanwhile, Bruce and Singh head to a mahjong place frequented by Eileen to gather information about his mother. They learn that they must meet a man named Hong for information. At the same time, Eileen finds herself offered a better tea, prompting her to consider talking. She proposes a deal to exchange territories of power, but Smith from the Boxer gang rejects her offer. Later, Charles and Alexis engage in conversation, with Charles sharing his backstory. Suddenly, their mutual attraction leads to an intimate moment between them. The following days, Bruce and Sing find themselves at Hong's place, when Bruce, attempting to channel his inner gangster, clumsily pins Hong's hand to the table with a nail. It doesn't quite work out, but Sing steps in, and they manage to extract the necessary information. Shortly after, they quickly reach out to James, who's already at the Boxer headquarters. James holds on to hope that Eileen is safe, trusting that the criminals wouldn't harm her. Meanwhile, Bruce and Sing strategize their next move to rescue Eileen. On the other hand, Eileen appears remarkably composed despite the circumstances. She expresses her determination to withstand interrogation without revealing any crucial information to Smith. However, it turns out Smith brought James, who has been successfully captured by his men. James immediately taken as a hostage to pressure Eileen into giving Smith the information he wants. Eileen looks really sad about it. Before this, Eileen and James said their goodbyes, thinking James might be killed by Smith. Shortly after, Bruce brings all the elderly women from the Mahjong place to the Boxer place, because he knows the Boxer gang won't hurt them. However, Smith figures out that Eileen's weakness was Bruce, and Bruce is deeply affected upon seeing James' lifeless body. On the other hand, after being intimate, Alexis provides Charles the information. But some things she says make Charles upset because he feels like she used him. After Charles leaves, Alexis calls someone, and it turns out Alexis put a GPS on Charles' phone earlier. At the Sun family's home, everyone is sad about James. Shortly after, Charles comes back, and together with Eileen and Bruce, they plan a family meeting. Eileen then writes down what she knows and tells Bruce to remember it all by morning. The following days, Eileen is at a supermarket buying lots of groceries. When she gets home, she tries to store them all away. Later, she tests Bruce to see if he remembered all the information she told him. And it turns out Bruce has successfully memorized all the information Eileen provided. Eileen then explains that the information was very important in case he gets caught by enemies. Shortly after, Bruce and Charles head to a hiding spot, where Bruce talks about how sad he still feels about James's death. He also asks Charles why he seems upset, but Charles doesn't want to talk about it. At the same time, Eileen is in Taiwan, her hometown. She looks calm, but tears fall down her face as she takes a deep breath. On the other hand, Bruce and Charles are now at a luxurious house with sports cars parked outside. It turns out to be John Cho's place. Bruce keeps trying to cheer up his brother, suggesting they take a break and enjoy the luxuries. He excitedly tries out all the cool stuff in John Cho's house. He also asks about TK, and Charles just says TK will survive but will be hurt. Unbeknownst to them, the police are watching as Alexis had installed a GPS on Charles's phone. At the same time, Eileen is in Taiwan, her hometown. Eileen plans to give the things she bought as gifts to the triad leaders. Back at John Cho's house, Charles starts to relax. He makes cake for everyone like usual. Then Bruce invites Grace over because he doesn't see her as a threat. Since they're near the beach, they all go and have fun there, including Grace and Bruce. Meanwhile, the police watching the house see no action and worry their plan might fail. Charles then inviting Bruce to play video games, but Bruce turns out to be better at gaming. Later, they sing karaoke and share their feelings, including Charles. Meanwhile, Alexis gets a bit worried hearing there are 3 women in the house. After karaoke, Grace and Bruce try to have some alone time at the beach. Grace reveals that she and her family came to Lede because of the snakeheads. However, her entire family was attacked and abused by them. This makes Bruce curious about the snakeheads. He also shares his own story when coming to LA at 5 and feeling lost. Upon hearing this, Grace kisses Bruce to show her feelings. Back in Taiwan, Eileen visits her mother, where they both express how much they miss each other. Eileen left home before, and now she wants to share her worries because her family is in danger. Then her mother sadly tells her that Eileen's sibling passed away from an illness. The next day, Eileen visits her sibling's grave, crying as she apologizes for not being there when they needed her. Returning to Charles and Bruce, where they're chatting in the living room, Charles shares the tough moments of his past that made him tough. At 15, he earned the name Charles' Son by killing someone who attacked his family, and this incident changed him into a ruthless person. Soon after, Charles decides to visit Alexis without telling where he's going. Before he leaves, he tells Bruce to stay put. As Charles leaves, 2 police officers watching the house are found dead, marked by a red bracelet, a sign of the Boxer gang. Then Grace wants to take Bruce out to meet her family and other immigrants. Bruce ended up at a place where children and people gathered joyfully, but it's actually the Boxer gang's headquarters. Grace didn't mean any harm, she just wanted Bruce to see. She explains how the Triad, once a good group, turned bad and started hurting their own people. This led to the Boxer gang forming, fighting against the Triad. Grace wants Bruce to tell where Eileen is because the Boxer gang wants to take out the Triad leaders. But Bruce refuses, and Grace tells how her family was killed by the Triad and turned into pig feed. On the other hand, Charles is standing outside Alexis's office. The police bosses are surprised when Alexis's phone rings, and it's Charles calling. Charles apologizes and asks to meet Alexis, but she refuses right away. This hurts Charles, and he immediately heads to the Korean gang to rescue TK. There, Charles lets out his feelings by taking down the Korean gang one by one. Even though he could have saved TK right away, Charles chooses to deal with the gang first before bringing TK home safely. Meanwhile, Eileen visits Big Son, who's in a coma. To check if he's really unconscious, Eileen pricks his finger with a pin. She then shares her plans with him, aiming to take control of the Jade Dragon and start a big movement. But as soon as she leaves, Big Son wakes up suddenly. On the other hand, the Boxer group starts attacking the remaining Triad leaders, but Eileen predicts their moves. She sends her people, including June, to stop the Boxer's assassins. Later, Eileen tells Bruce and Charles about this, and she will arranging a meeting to choose a new Triad chairman, since there hasn't been one for 20 years. Bruce and Charles are surprised after hearing the news. Eileen then asks for Charles' full support because he's the strongest fighter in the Triad. But Bruce questions her decision. TK overhears and asks Bruce to take him when the Sun family becomes the Triad chairman. However, Bruce mocks him instead, saying that TK can't do anything and he is a coward. Hurt by this, TK decides to leave the house. It seems that Bruce's actions are to prevent TK from being in danger in the future. As Charles and Eileen plan for the upcoming meeting to choose the Triad chairman, Eileen reminds Charles to observe the tea that will be served to Frank Ma. If there's a tea leaf, Frank Ma will share his past. Suddenly, the lights go out in the house, and Charles gets ready in case there's an attack, but then one of his subordinates arrives and, unexpectedly, Big Son also shows up. He's been pretending to be in a coma for some time to find out who the enemy is. Big Son, who hasn't seen Bruce in a while, talks to him and says he's got a Lamborghini ready for him. Meanwhile, Alexis is being questioned by her bosses for her mistake in exposing the Triad, but she convinces them she can handle it. Meanwhile, Big Son gathers his entire family at his mansion, where even Bruce and Charles are provided with fancy clothes for the upcoming meeting. It's clear that there's tension between Big Son and Eileen, with Big Son strongly opposes Eileen running for Triad chairman. He surprises Charles by saying he'll take charge of the meeting and nominate Charles as the only candidate. When Bruce hears this, he asks Charles about this, and Charles seems obedient to his father and agrees. Later, Big Son's bodyguard is seen watching an action movie he loves. Bruce then almost gets into a fight over it, but Charles stops him, knowing Bruce can't fight. Charles suggests letting them be since they'll have a big influence at the meeting. Next, Charles talks with Eileen about what he should do. Shortly after, Bruce joins them, and Eileen reveals her plan, including how the Boxer gang found out the names of the Triad leaders. Bruce feels betrayed that Eileen used him, but she explains it was to protect him because he's kind-hearted. Eileen then says goodbye to Big Son, as she won't attend the meeting and asks for some money as she's going to the salon. Still upset about his mother's plan and wanting to keep her and Charles safe, Bruce tries to contact Grace. He tells her about the upcoming Triad meeting in LA to appoint a chairman, hoping Charles won't become the chairman and his family can live normally. Meanwhile, Alexis has organized various units like the FBI, CIA, and SWAT to capture the triad leaders at the meeting. But it's risky for her career because she doesn't know where the meeting will be and relies only on the GPS in Charles's phone. On the other hand, Bruce seems to warn Charles not to go to the meeting. But Charles says he's doing it for the family, and once it's over, he'll give anything to Bruce, and this touches Bruce. At a fancy hotel, all the triad leaders are welcomed by Big Son one by one. They take their seats and enjoy the food. Meanwhile, Alexis feels worried because Charles hasn't moved, and phone was taken by mistake. Bruce, not wanting his brother in danger, calls the female fighter for help. As they get ready for the meeting, Bruce doesn't realize he has Charles's phone in his suit. This means Alexis's team can track the meeting's location, and they prepare quickly. When they arrive, Bruce sees from the kitchen that Big Son is speaking at the meeting, saying the triad must unite because it's what history shows. Charles then notices Bruce and goes to him, but Singh quickly brings him back to the meeting. During the voting, Eileen surprised Big Son by declaring herself the best choice for triad chairperson. She worked with Frank Ma, who nominated her as a special member to speak at the forum. Frank Ma was supposed to talk about his past during the voting, signaled by a tea leaf in his glass. Tensions rose as the SWAT team prepared to raid the meeting. Meanwhile, a woman with a bomb disguised as a cake appeared. But before it exploded, Bruce entered the forum, removed the bomb, and chaos ensued. Triad leaders drew their weapons, and Grace, working for the Boxer gang, killed one of them. The SWAT, which was initially going to arrest the leaders, immediately retreated, and Singh managed to kill Smith, who murdered James. Amidst the violence, only a few remained standing, with Bruce and Eileen escaped with TK's help. Knowing this, Big Son was furious at Eileen for the chaos and ordered Charles to kill Bruce to hurt Eileen. Charles hesitated, torn between loyalty to his father and his brother. After the chaos, Frank Ma ends up behind bars in the Los Angeles Police Department. He insists on speaking only to fellow Chinese and strikes a deal with Alexis. But before agreeing, he asks if Big Son has been caught, which he hasn't. Knowing this, Frank refuses to make a deal until Big Son is caught. Meanwhile, Eileen and Bruce hide out in a small hotel, where Eileen is furious with Bruce for leaking the triad leaders' meeting. Bruce then explains he just wants his family to live normally without constant threats. Eileen admits that she always puts others' wishes before her own, and the meeting is crucial for her to become the Dragon Head. After saying this, she leaves abruptly. Meanwhile, at the police station, Alexis announces Charles as a suspect, and they must find him, focusing on Big Son. Back at the hotel, Bruce feels confused and alone until Charles arrives and confronts him for disrupting the triad meeting. Bruce apologizes, and soon Eileen joins them, seeking an explanation. Charles then reveals that Frank Ma and others might have been arrested or killed, and he was ordered by their father to kill Bruce. Eileen then shares a shocking revelation about Charles' childhood, revealing their father's cruel manipulation to turn Charles into a ruthless fighter. This news shocks Charles. Eileen then apologizes for not being able to protect her children. Bruce then urges Charles to choose between killing him and their mother or their father. He emphasizes the need to stop their power-hungry father. Charles questions how the police knew about the meeting if Boxer didn't collaborate with them. As Charles decides to return to his father, Bruce reveals that their suits were switched, and Charles's phone had a GPS planted on it by Alexis, allowing her to track him. Not long after, Charles returned to the safe house where Big Son and his loyal bodyguards were. He confessed to his father that he couldn't bring himself to kill his younger brother. Charles tried to negotiate to spare Bruce and their mother, but Big Son was furious as betrayal meant death, even for family. Big Son then ordered Singh to kill Bruce and Eileen. Charles hesitated, but when he tried to stop Singh, the other bodyguards blocked him. In the chaos, Charles ended up shooting, but Singh escaped. Unfortunately, Charles was arrested by the police for firing in a public area. Later, Charles was taken to the interrogation room, where Alexis questioned him about Big Son's whereabouts. Despite the offer of freedom, Charles refused to betray his family. He pleaded for release, fearing for his mother and brother's safety, but Alexis, despite her feelings for Charles, kept him in the interrogation room. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Eileen was cooking when suddenly approached by Singh. A fight ensued, but Eileen managed to overpower Singh. Bruce arrived and asked Eileen to rest, but then received a call from Alexis, exploiting his weakness to learn about Big Son's whereabouts. Bruce improvised, asking to secretly meet Charles without CCTV and audio recordings, in exchange for information, and Alexis agreed. After the CCTV and others were turned off, Bruce entered the interrogation room and assured Charles of their mother's safety. He then asked for their father's location, not to share with Alexis, but to confront him. Not long after, Bruce went to the safe house where Big Son was alone. Big Son tried to manipulate Bruce into taking Charles' place in Taiwan, but Bruce shot him in the stomach. He gave Big Son the choice to die slowly or call for help and face the consequences. Bruce then left him there and walked away. As Alexis watched Charles through the interrogation glass, she awaited Bruce's next move. Soon, news arrived that an elderly man from Taiwan had been hospitalized after being shot. Alexis rejoiced, seeing it as a major win against the Taiwanese mafia. Charles was eventually released, and Alexis saw this as her chance to advance in her career. Back at Eileen and Bruce's home, they were joined by Charles, TK, and June. Initially, everything seemed okay, until Eileen announced her intention to go to China and take over the Jade Dragon and the Triad there. Bruce was shocked to hear this, realizing he couldn't stop her anymore, as this was what Eileen had been waiting for. Meanwhile, Big Son lay in the hospital, handcuffed. Shortly after, Eileen visited him, seeking revenge. She injected him with a drug that would cause eternal suffering, rendering him unable to speak or move. The following days, it is shown that June peacefully parts ways with her sister May, while TK attracts attention from women, and Alexis starts to miss Charles and hopes he'll return. In the end, Eileen and Bruce prepare to part ways for a while, but they're not alone. Charles appears, stating he must protect his family. He believes his mother will need his help in China to face her adversaries, and thus the story concludes. Moral lesson from the story: if you accidentally switch suits with your brother, make sure it doesn't have a tracker on it, or you might end up meeting with an unexpected attack while baking your cake.